Hi there, I'm Tim Foley from the Canadian Outdoor Equipment Company. This is Rob Young. Today we're going to be going through setup of a couple of Esker tents, basic setup and tips and tricks for setup and using the stoves. So with all of the Esker tents, you do have an instruction sheet that comes with it. We're going to do 2 tents in 2 different styles. So we're going to start with the 10x10 classic tent, and we're going to be setting this up bushcraft style, we'll call it, which means this is all you need to take out with you, just the tent. Poles, pegs, all the pieces that we need for it we'll be fashioning from stuff we find in the environment. We'll also do a larger 12x12 using a pole kit. So if you are going to provincial parks and such, you can set it up using those methods. What's cool about the Esker tents or pyramid tents in general is that you can set them up in a variety of environments or landscapes. So what we're doing here today is actually setting up in what's probably the most tricky setup, is an open, flat area. Ideally, if we were winter camping, I would actually look for a place with some trees around it so we can tie off the trees, possibly a little more sheltered from the wind than we are here. But we'll do this so that we can show you kind of a mix of styles of putting up tents. Step number 1 is to flatten out the area where you're going to set up the tent. So you kind of just ballpark this to begin with. Once we get the tent out and on the ground, we can see if we're actually too big or too small. But this will get us going at any rate. So you want to do this for a couple of reasons. One is to stabilize the snowpack. So when you're putting your pole in the ground, it's not going through deep, uncompacted snow. Same with the stove. It just helps to have kind of a more stable base underneath yourself before you get going. It also helps to flatten out any snow drifts or uneven ground. So we actually got lucky today in that it's been very cold, but today it is not. So you'll notice we can have our fingers out. It's not really a problem at all. If you've bought a tent new, what you may want to do is get your lines ready before you go out, so you have a minimum of having to deal with your digits if it's extremely cold out. So as we're doing a bushcraft setup here, next step is going to be to go and collect wood that's suitable for making poles, a central pole, and pegs for staking in the bottom. Now, a couple things to note about this. We are in an area where we can collect wood, and that's legal. If you're in a provincial park, do not do this setup with your tent. That's not something you ought to be doing. We'll show you another setup using poles and pegs that you can use for a provincial park setup. So as we are using a stove, next step, to remove your stovepipe cover completely. It's velcroed onto the tent here, so just remove it. Once we've got that done, we need to spread out the tent. Basically the 4 corners are going to make a square with the 4 corners. We've laid out the tent in basically a square shape. The classic is a 4-sided tent. We've got the pegs that we fashioned. What we're going to do is secure the corner lash out points. And when you do this, you don't want the tent stretched out too far. This can be kind of a loose square that we'll adjust later. So don't worry about stretching out as far as it'll possibly go. That will interfere with putting up the pole. The sides of your tent won't line up proper if you do that. So kind of a rough, loose square. Don't jam in your pegs too hard because they may need adjusting. So we found ourselves a good center pole here. Much too high. Obviously the center peak is about 7.5 feet, 7.5 to 8 feet, depending on the ground underneath. So one thing you don't want to do is cut this too short to begin with. Easier to take a little bit off. If you take too much off, there's no going back. You got to find yourself a new stick. So I'm going to take a bit off here. We'll give that a go. That'll probably need a couple of adjustments to get it right. Now this is way too high, I can tell already. Let me take that down a bit more. Once you've got it kind of where you think might be a good height, insert that into the center peak. So when we put the pole in, what we're looking for is that the sod cloth, where the canvas meets the sod cloth, we want that to be at ground level. If it raises it higher than that, your pole's too high. So we've got our center pole in place. The issue is though, the center pole right now is making direct contact with the snow. Once we have a stove going in there, the snow will melt and that pole can go further into the snow, and then the height of your tent gets compromised and your tent starts drooping. So a great idea is to put a piece of wood underneath that pole. That'll help to spread the weight out of the center pole of the tent, so you don't have a point that the hole pushes straight down into the snow. And I think with that in place, we should be at about the right height here, so we'll give it a go. So now that we've got that more or less figured out, we're going to close the front door and readjust the pegs on the corner if we need to. We can stretch them out a bit. Now's the time to adjust the stretch and to lay out the tent. So we'll do that, and then we'll start guying out the sidelines. Okay, so that's kind of step one done. Now, the cool thing about these tents is there's different ways to guy out your lines. As I mentioned previously, if we were in a more forested area, we could then just find trees and start guying out our sides to trees. As it is here on an open expanse, there's two ways you can do it. You can either do long lines straight out, or you could find some more branches and stuff and insert poles. Depending on time of day, how much time you have, I personally prefer the pole method in that then you don't have long lines stretching out around your tent, a little easier to get around the tent. So maybe we'll do a mix of both. Maybe a couple poles in the front, and we'll do long lines out the back. So you don't need to worry about adjusting the lines too tightly right now. We'll probably need to go through and adjust it. So good old-fashioned slip knot, easy way to hold the line and be able to get it undone easily to adjust. Okay, so the tent is kind of basically set up now. Now comes the round of final adjustments. So this tie out point here is extended past our tie out point here, our guy line. So you see the angle of the wall is tilted back. That will result in the interior wall drooping in. So what we need to do now is adjust these points here so that they line up with the guy line tie outs. This is why you don't want to go through all the trouble of really securing these into the ground off the word go. It's kind of tricky to judge this. I mean, we didn't get it exactly right either. So this is the last stage. So this peg has to come back a bit so that our wall is straight there. Last step, put some snow around the snow skirt on the outside, help to kind of weight everything down and keep cold air from coming in. Okay, so the tent's basically set up now. So we're going to break out the stove and then get that going.